the train to there's.
Oh yes, you used to be able to get on the train when I was a youngster in Grand Central, and it would take you right to Canaan,
Mm-hmm.
where you had parked your car the weekend before, drive up here. It was very nice until they stopped coming,
Yeah.
and they keep saying they might resurrect it.
Oh, really? Oh, that would be.
Well, movement from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
but it would cost money and
Yeah.
so forth.
So, do you remember staying in Norfolk in the wintertime before
Yes,
this house was built?
because occasionally my parents, well, one winter they rented a place at the big house from Uncle Fred
Oh, really?
and spent a few months here.
At the big house?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But normally they would only come here maybe once or twice a year in the winter. They like to come up in the winter. And they'd have to park the car at the top of the hill and walk down. Or I think we had a toboggan.
Mm-hmm.
Put the supplies on there and come down. Well, of course, the road was all covered with snow. And they seemed to enjoy that. I didn't particularly.
It's pretty cold, I bet.
It could get quite cold in the ice box of Connecticut, as they
Mhm.
still proudly call it. But one of my jobs on those occasional winter visits was to dump the chemical toilet
Oh.
back in the woods, which I didn't enjoy much. And we get water from the brook,
Mm-hmm.
carry it up to have water, because there wasn't any running water that stayed on.
Right.
It was just pipes.
And how did you stay warm?
We stayed warm, where they had a very efficient coal-fired stove in the kitchen,
Oh.
kept that going, and then the fireplaces with firewood. And I remember, at least sometimes, in the depths of winter, we would have sleeping bags in the living room in front of the, go to bed, at least I would go to bed earlier, obviously, in front of the fireplace,
Uh-huh.
on the floor in front of the fireplace. So it was warm at least when you went to bed, if not when you woke up. And they seemed to like this, this adventure in the winter occasionally, not very often, my goodness. And, but that's where I learned to ski.
Mm.
Well, I forget where I first started skiing, maybe at school. Because I was going to school in New York for 1 year at the Dalton School. I think even one of the years that we come up here time to time. And later I went to boarding school
Millbrook.
in Millbrook, state of New York, about an hour from here, isn't it?
Yeah, about that.
Which was nice. I remember one year they had a policy that if you had a pet, you could bring it to school and they would provide a place for it to sleep
Oh.
if you took care of feeding it.
Uh-huh.
And I took our dog, what's his name?
Was it Kim?
Kim, yes, border collie.
Mm-hmm.
And so every evening I'd have to go down to the stable where he slept and feed him. Yes, he lived here in the summertime, of course. And I guess he stayed up with some neighbors when we went in the winter.
Hmm.
I remember later when we had a corgi,
Oh, yeah.
the corgi would stay up here with the
Russes.
Russes, and he became attached to them, which sort of upset my mother, I guess. But what do you expect? They were feeding him. 'Cause in the summer we'd go up and he'd come stay
Yeah.
with us, and occasionally go back to visit them. And he was the dog, the border collie. I remember we went up, my mother and I, to the Great Lakes, the shore of Lake Ontario, New York State, but right on the coast there, across from Canada. And it's where we got our border collie,
Mm-hmm.
which comes from the border of Scotland and England, I think. And I remember at that time, the British Crown Prince, who abdicated to get married,
Oh, yeah. Was that Edward?
Edward, I guess, had just done so. And they had in his store, I guess it was maybe in Canada, at least it was across the lake from Canada, so they had Canadian things. They had a cup for his inauguration as king,
Yeah.
which never took place, but they had these cups, which were interesting.
That's where you got that cup.
It's a historic item, and that's where I got the coronation of the king that never happened. And I had a good friend here who also came up. He was a child's cousin, Peter Shiras. His mother had been a child's,
Mm-hmm.
and they lived in the Shiras house, which I think no longer exists. It's where the Whoosies live now. Yeah.
Oh, near the Lawrences?
Lawrence.
Uh-huh.
It's their house. It was their house, and I think they replaced it. Not where their present house is, but up the hill a little
Uh-huh.
bit. And so occasionally I'd go spend the night at his house with his grandmother. And he'd come down occasionally, spend the night here. But we were friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't heard from him lately. For a while, he and his wife subsequently came here in the summer and stayed there, but I haven't seen them for quite a while now.
Do you remember Uncle Fred?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly, at Christmas time, because the whole family would come up here at Christmas, including my grandmother, who was Uncle Fred's sister,
Mm-hmm.
and they were the two connected to Norfolk by inheritance because the Walcott family had been here in Norfolk, and had been a series of generations of doctors
Right.
who were called Welch. And so when Uncle Fred and his business friend from New York, Starling Childs, decided that they'd like to have a country place together, they picked Norfolk because that's where my Uncle Fred's family had been. And they bought up land from the farmers. There's a lot of farming around here, it no longer exists. And one of the biggest farms belonged to the Burr family, whose descendants still live down on the corner of the west
down on the
side
west
and
side.
Windrow Road,
Mm-hmm.
one on each side of the road. And they've been preserving those old houses rather nicely, well kept up. And but they were one of the large farming establishments, and they sold their land to Giles and Walker, who formed a game-keeping operation.
Did they form Great Mountain Forest together?
Yes,
Oh.
that was the formation of Great Mountain Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they put in the sawmill.
Oh, up at
Chrissy.
Tamarack Pond.
Yeah, Chrissy barn,
Mm-hmm.
and they had the seat of their forest keeping operations there for a while. And then their office, I guess, is still there,
Mm-hmm.
but they moved they acquired even more land, I guess, and anyway, moved back into the woods to Great Mountain Forest headquarters. And so they were there from the beginning, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And